Morning's chapel is actually very, very dear to me. Some of you may know already, but I had the opportunity of pastoring a church that was really kind of off the grid. The internet had just arrived, but most people didn't have it. Communication with the church, therefore, was still not done through emails. We had phone trees, and that barely worked. Decisions were made on the backs of, trucks as we were out working in the fields. I remember there were opportunities for me to do lots of things outside of my area of gifting that I wasn't skilled for, qualified for at all. But the pastor needed to be a part of it for the pastor to be real and for, anybody to listen to what I had to say. There was a whole nother ethic out there that I got to encounter. It was incredible testing experience and enriching experience. And so this is something that's very dear to my heart. And in fact, one of the reasons I moved to Alaska is to encourage pastors and young people who are heading into ministry. Most of you are going to be heading into a rural context, not a large church context, not a multi-staff context. Most of you will be heading into, if the statistics hold true, into a small church arena. We think small church, bad church, but that's not actually true at all. Some of God's greatest servants have come out of small churches or rural churches, and I felt like because of what the Lord had used me to do and the encouragement I had found in that arena, that the Lord was also calling me to a place like Alaska Bible College to say to some of you guys, hey, there's going to be some things you encounter in that realm, but you can absolutely do it. The reason that is such an important message is this, and I was in seminary, so this is almost 20 years ago now. It was 20 years ago now. When I was in seminary, I heard from one of my professors, and it has held true, that nobody wants to be a senior pastor, that everybody coming to seminary is wanting to be an associate or a youth pastor. In order to be an associate or youth pastor, you have to be what kind of a church? A church that can support an associate or youth pastor. That's right. My generation was a generation that did not want to take leadership positions. If you go back 2 generations earlier to the World War II generation, it was the opposite. Everybody wanted to be a senior pastor. There was a huge missions movement, and the call to go to the ends of the earth was being fulfilled. Their next generation, my parents, the baby boomers, did the opposite. Safety was protocol. They grew up in a situation that seems too volatile, almost dangerous, and it was not seen as a real positive thing. My generation, then growing up in a more safe culture, said, "Who needs to lead anyway? We'll just head a different direction. We'll just play it really, really safe." As a result, small churches across America are dying by the thousands. Rural churches have a hard time finding a pastor. In fact, they may have to wait years to find a pastor. So there's a new movement that's been launched recently, and it was something I was a part of, and that is going into some of these rural contexts. And oftentimes there's a whole list of struggles that larger churches in urban areas don't have to experience. And actually seeing if we can't take this real estate and the people that live there and turn it around for the Lord and the glory of God. When I came to Alaska Bible College, Justin
Archuletta.
Thank you. Archuletta, I've struggled with that since the day we met. Shared that similar vision, that similar calling, going into rural contexts and seeing what the Lord might do there. We have a number of professors on staff who are in that situation as well. Some of you, this is the first encounter you've had with a conversation like this, and maybe the Lord will use this conversation. But here's the takeaway. I'm just going to show the cards early. The takeaway: I want you to be encouraged in your heart that God isn't just working in cities; He is working everywhere. He is doing things and He may be calling you in your generation to do something something that my generation and the baby boomer generation, for all intents and purposes, started to move away from. Not everybody, but by and large, started to move away from. And that is a reinvestment in going to the ends of the earth, which may place you in a rural context. So I've invited Justin here for this particular conversation. He is in the midst of this kind of a unique ministry. It's intentional, which I love about it. That bleeds my heart as well. Justin, first, kind of tell us some about the dynamics of living in a rural context. What does that look like?
So Sutton in particular is where I live, and it's an anomaly in a lot of respects because it was a coal town. And so just driving 15 minutes down the road, it's like you're driving into West Virginia. And it's very much like that culturally. And so that mentality is so much different than just 15 minutes away in Palmer. And we have people who don't leave Sutton at all. They get everything that they need from the general store. Like they live, stay, breathe, and die right there, and won't move. So it's just a different culture altogether, and it makes life fun and challenging. We have the opportunity to raise our own animals and gardens and stuff like that, and learn to be subsistence.
Not acceptable in my HOA.
See, but it's a neat experience. It's a challenge, but it's a way to relate to the people in the community because that's how they live. That's what they do.
What's some of the history just that's unique to Sutton? I think you mentioned coal mining or something like that. And then tell me a bit about the history, because I think in our conversation, I don't think this is unique to Sutton. A lot of small towns, rural churches are dying, not on purpose. What are some of the dynamics that have really shaped that town?
So in particular, the economy of Sutton was coal. It started early in the 1900s. They were mining coal there. And so people moved there, raised families there, and then the mine closed and the jobs left. And this is early on in Alaska history. And so there's just those challenges of distance. And so there weren't jobs here in Palmer necessarily. Palmer was itty bitty too. And so the jobs left, the people stayed. And when people don't have work, we tend to find ways to ease the pain, we think. And so often alcoholism and drugs and this just culture of abuse permeates the people. And it's passed down generation after generation after generation. So people that are my age in the village are 3 generations away from when the coal was there, when the mine was there. And yet they still have that coal mine mentality. And they run to drugs and alcohol by and large. So that's a challenge with many rural places. When the economy, when jobs leave, people stay. And what do you do?
Yeah. What do you do? And it's really hard to move beyond what Dad did. And so you end up with this culture. There are other people who move into those places. Are they coming there for community, or are there other reasons that they'll kind of escape to these small rural communities?
Yeah. Most people who escape to a rural community are doing it because they want to be an individual. They leave me alone, put up my fence, don't look over my fence, and just leave me alone. There are people out there. There's a small group of believers within Sutton, and who attend churches all over the valley, not just Sutton Bible Church or Alpine Baptist in Sutton. So they're working in some way to try and make a change, revive the town, but by and large, people are very much guarded. I've put up my fence. And so it takes a long time to knock the doors down, knock the walls down, and get into these people's lives.
So you have kind of this interesting dynamic where you have old school families that really they go way back. Their roots are deep, but the reason for being there is just to kind of maintain. Then you have implants into the community, but everybody, generally speaking, is relatively independent. How does that, as you move, if you're heading into ministry into one of these places, how does that end up impacting your family life, your family dynamic? You're bringing maybe oftentimes kids into this sort of a situation. When you talk about trials and opportunities, how does that kind or that style of community, what do you have to prepare for as you're bringing a family into that context?
So if it weren't for the church, it would continue to be a very, very difficult place to raise a family, because of the independent mindset and because of the histories of abuse and alcohol and drugs that are just kind of in the ground there. There's not light. There's no hope there, outside of what Christ brings. And so the church was unique in our experience in that, like, we brought children into our lives after we were established in the church. And these kids, most of we fostered them and have recently adopted them. And so they didn't know love. They had never experienced love. And it was this church who opened up their arms and said, "We'll love you." And they showed the love of Christ. And so my kids, that was an anchor to us, the family that was there. And if we didn't have that, the struggle, the fight, and to break through the walls in these relationships, it takes time. It takes investment. You have to want to be around these people, and you have to live life with these people, and see them in the light and the way that our Lord sees them, as individuals hurting and in pain and with no hope.
That resonates with me. The town that I was in, the level of corruption within the city, those who ran it, was so bad. We didn't even trust our drinking water. And so, that sort of a depressed economy, nothing will ever change. It's just getting worse. I mean, that just impacts everybody, and they're looking for those escapes. And you just naturally don't trust outsiders, and that can be really hard on the kids. And I know in my home, I came into a context, as you know, Justin, where my kids had zero friends in the church. It was only older, and so we left this vibrant young faith community for that. That was a really hard thing as a parent to have to pray for people that didn't exist yet. On the other hand, one of the opportunities, is all these aunts and uncles, all these grandmas and grandpas that you have access to in a small church. And I know, as we talked, that goes towards your children, but your children also have an impact in the other direction. Tell me a little bit about the opportunities there.
So like you said, same exact experience. We came into the church, there were 9 people on average there, regularly attending. And the Lord just brought people. I'm not a subject matter expert. I'm not the go-to guy on this, but He's chosen to use me and others within that community. And the church has grown. And like you said, we're praying for people that we didn't know and
don't exist yet.
That's right. But this relationship that my children have with all of these people, these aunts and uncles, grandmas and grandpas, they are brothers and sisters in the faith, but they love on these kids. But my children have learned to interact with people of all age groups, and they minister to those people of the church just as much. They run up and give that person a hug who probably hasn't been hugged all week long, because they're living alone, no family around. And, a little kid runs up and gives you a big hug, says, "Good morning." that ministers to your heart, that shows the love of Christ. And so it's this beautiful thing to watch, to see how my children are ministered to, but they get to minister as well. And so oftentimes we forget that our young believers, our children, are capable of ministering.
Well, I just think that's so important, because one of the big obstacles I think that we all face is going, well, that's a great ministry, but I don't want to bring my kids into that situation. And without recognizing what God may be doing to shape our children in a place of isolation. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Inevitably, you brought up the idea of you came into a situation and there were 9 people, I think you said. Inevitably, simply by your presence, you show up. Everything changed for them, and it inevitably brings about change, opportunity for them. But that has its own set of trials and tribulations. Talk to us a little bit about, as the church begins to develop or begins to grow, as you have an influence and whatnot in that situation, what are some of the hurdles that you faced early on, in your experience with Sutton?
So when I came into the church, I felt very clearly, like after visiting Sutton, that the Lord had a purpose for my wife and I to live there, and to be a part of this church, and to love these people and to love this community. And so we came in and we're just willing, like, okay, we're gonna serve however we can. But here's a church with 9 people, so they didn't even have an elder board. There weren't enough people in the church. There weren't enough qualified men to be elders. And so everybody was taking roles and responsibilities, trying to keep the church alive. And as more people, change happened and more people came in, we decided to move towards an elder-led church, and we had qualified men. And oftentimes you had people who were in a position of leadership early on when it was small, and it's so hard. We become very possessive of things as human beings, and it's so hard to let things go. And that was a fight, it was,
especially in a small town context, right? Where your sense of honor in the community is based upon your title or something that you're doing for the church. And yeah. How did you guys work through some of those issues?
It's slow. I mean, we have 2 things working against us, but I think it's really good. It's a small church, so everybody knows everybody. You can't escape that. And we've chosen to be an elder-led church, a plurality of elders who work under consensus. So we come together and we make decisions for the church as elders. And so even on the elder board, it takes time to get things done, because we all have our own personal beliefs. And I may not agree with this guy over here, but at the end of the day, when the group says this is where we feel the Lord's leading, and if I still don't agree with it, I concede to that. I say, okay, this is the direction that we're going to go, because this is where everybody's at. But it takes a long time. It's been slow, incremental changes. Never expect to go in and see things change overnight in a small church, or a rural church. And like I said, that dynamic of elder-led slows it down even more. But the Lord has used it in amazing ways, and like from what I can see.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you are a church, and as you begin to grow in that, you're looking for these leaders. Have you found it difficult, at times at least in your context, to be able to not necessarily to identify those leaders, who they might be, but for them to be willing to step up to the plate? I mean, has that been one of the major hurdles, is just saying, hey, you're qualified, what are you doing? Can you step? Because there's a lot riding on that. If there's failure, or if there's previous relational conflict or reputation in the town, that you might see good stuff, but they still don't see that in themselves.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't think it's any different than a big church. There's always a group of people who are faithful to serve, and then we were working together to try and encourage others within the church to serve and to see their giftings and to use their giftings. That's part of the purpose of the church, is to equip individuals. And part of that equipping is convincing them that they're capable of it and that they're called to do these things, and helping them to see those things. And so it is difficult in general just to get people to serve the bride. But when you only have a few people, the necessity sometimes is a good motivator, and brings people in to a place where they normally wouldn't go in a larger attended church, because there's that need, there's that necessity there.
You can't just escape in the room. Everybody sees you. Yeah. Which presents some struggles, because people rise to positions that really they're not equipped to do. But also times it's really a place for growth for everybody. I want to switch gears for just a minute and go a little bit to the Shadowlands here. One of the things that I noticed in my ministry, and as I've talked with rural pastors, it's a thing. And that is that small churches have a more difficult time standing up to the wolves. That oftentimes they're easier to pick off, because small churches naturally are so hungry for those leaders, for good people. And so people, a family shows up and they've got a lot of resources, and they do everything right. And all of a sudden they're there whenever the church doors open, and everybody assumes the best about them, but it's not always that case. Have you had to really encounter that? And what maybe could we do in that conversation to help ourselves maintain, God's agenda?
Yeah. So I came in on the tail end of crisis at Sutton. They had a pastor, who, for all intents and purposes, had a moral failure and left. He ran off with his secretary and left the church, took the deed to another church, said, "Here you go." And so it left not only the church broken, the people of the church broken, but it left a community broken, because they had built relationships as well. And so there was this vision of, or the community saw the church as a bunch of hypocrites. Well, we're all broken. We're all fallen people, and we all struggle. So it's taken a really, really long time to earn back some of that respect and just the right to have a relationship with these people, because of the hurt that was caused. Yeah.
So, I mean, in a rural context, you would say, not starting with a clean slate. And in fact, there are sometimes good reasons why that church has remained small through the years, that if you don't acknowledge, you can't ever work to overcome. What are some of the things that we can do in a small, you don't have sometimes a denomination behind you. Sometimes you're coming into a situation and there's a family and everybody knows that that's the family and they really make all the decisions, and you thought you were the pastor and then you found out you weren't the real pastor. What are some of the things that we can do, do you think, that really help us move through that territory successfully?
You're always going to be presented with those challenges. No matter where you do ministry, there's always going to be some roadblock, whether it's a person or a thing, an event in the life. And what has worked for us is the plurality of elders. That we have a group of men rather than one man set up on a pedestal saying that's our pastor, that's the guy, and he's inaccessible, and we're always going to him with our hurts and our brokenness. We have a group of men who are all gifted in different ways that I look over and I'm like, I don't have that, but the Lord brings it together, and so we have this kind of level of accountability for ourselves and for the church. And so we're able to address these things as a group. And so we've had to go to people and say, hey, this Facebook post that you made, I don't think it was appropriate. I don't think it was something loving, or from a Christ-like heart. And in turn, the individual, both apologized on Facebook and apologized to the church, and that was his choice. But you can't let things, no matter where you're at, you can't brush them under the rug. Things have to be addressed, but we also have to remember, and this is something that is really dear to me because I have experience with people who have fallen. I have friends who have fallen. We can't just kick them out the door. There's a need for restoration and reconciliation. Now that person has to be willing, but we come alongside them. We don't kick them out because they fell. That's not, and it does a disservice, not only to the church, but to other churches outside.
And I've just seen that be a real opportunity in small churches is, because you don't have the luxury of escaping. A person can't just leave your church and leave the community. You're going to see that individual down at the laundromat or the coffee shop the next morning. It almost does act as another layer of accountability to say, we'd better be dealing with this person out of the love of Christ and not just out of some policy that we've written down. And I've seen that be a good growth moment for myself personally, but also for elders and leaders in that situation. So one of the things that I see as a real strength there is if there is a situation and you have to confront, you're not alone. You're not a lone wolf yourself, right? You're in a context where there are personalities, and you increase your ability to really minister in that sense. So excellent. That's oftentimes, within the context of the community. Talk for just a minute about those relational conflicts that maybe have impact in the church, but they happen outside of the community of faith, where there are something happened at the football game, or something happened down at the local diner at the dance. And now that is influencing where people are sitting on Sunday morning in the pew. You say you can't sweep those things under the rug, but how does that extra layer of accountability and sensitivity look, to a group that's trying to walk their church through that situation?
I mean, the general store in Sutton, that's the hub. That's where everybody kind of congregates and goes to. And so you hear about it. You hear about stuff that happened within the community, and they talk about it. They talk about the church. They talk about, and in that context at the general store, we try and address it and in love say, hey, why don't you come see for yourself? Why don't you come to the church and see for yourself? So
rather than defensiveness, there's actually or exclusivity. There's actually a, hey, come on, check this out. Yeah, we're open to conversation.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. And we intentionally, as a church, rather than having, the traditional Wednesday night and Sunday night meeting at the church, we go into the community. We go into the general store, and we have our men's Bible study in the general store. And people from the community come in, they see us every Thursday. We're there, we're talking about God, we're engaging his word, and they have questions, whether they want to really know or not. They have questions, and they'll sit down and they'll talk with us, and we engage. And through that, with the ladies ministry like that, my wife, made a friend and walked this lady for 4 years. 4 years she spent just pouring and investing into this young lady's life. And this last winter, she accepted Christ. And not only that, but she's on fire for the Lord. She's ministering to her mom, who's the owner of the general store, like sharing Christ with her. Like that's what you want to see. That's what we hope and we pray for, is to see God use our people in our church to touch lives and to change and transform lives.
Now, we're focusing a lot on these, relationships because they're so strategic, as you say, in this sort of a context of ministry. you're not the only church in Sutton. In my town, I think there were 5 other churches of 15 people or less. So how have you guys positioned yourselves to engage other churches? Are they seen as a threat? Are they seen as an advantage? How do you interact with the leaders and the people that attend another church?
So our philosophy as elders and as a church, and as a result, is we just want to see people fellowshipping. We want to see people going to church. And believe it or not, there's as of last census, there's 1,500 people between Moose Creek and Kings River. You would never believe that driving through, but there are. And so we have there is a group of believers within Sutton, wonderful people that are attending Farm Loop and have gone to Lazy Mountain all over. And then we have Alpine Baptist in Sutton, just down the road. And they're a particular flavor, of faith, and it's not my flavor, just like Sutton's not everybody else's flavor, but people are engaging in God's word, and they're engaging in the churches. And so we, as a church, reached out to this other church and said, hey, why don't you come help with the food pantry? Because that's one of the ministries that we do. Why don't you come? Let's partner together. And there was resistance, and we're going to continue to work to try and encourage them to come alongside us and minister to the community in that way. But ultimately, we're all on the same team. We're all doing the same fight. And so to fight over people and to fight over what church is better doesn't get us anywhere.
A radical generosity has its own outcome. Yeah, excellent. So, and as I've heard you talk, as we've heard you talk here, and I know as we've talked many, many times through the last several years, Justin, there is a heart in that church that is beyond the walls, what some people might call missional or just a strong desire to outreach. One of the hurdles that small churches inevitably have is just financial hurdles to do all the things that are in their hearts to do. I've been so impressed as I've tracked Sutton through the years. You guys just kind of blow through those hurdles, and you have a large ministry outside of even the town. Tell us about some of those ministry opportunities and maybe how some of those things have come about. But what are you guys involved in even outside of your local community? So
we went for a very long time without a pastor. And in that time kind of developed the elder-led preaching elders. But we were ministered to by Alaska Bible College because the professors made themselves available to come and preach and teach. And through that, we really got a heart for wanting to help other churches going through the same thing. Here we have a group of men rather than one pastor. We have a group of men that are all able to teach on some level. And so we can send them. We can send them to these churches. We send elders up to Cantwell, Mendeltona. They've been up to Kenny Lake. And so we try and minister to these other rural churches on the road systems. We're hoping to get into the bush more, and with Ron and his piloting abilities, like we have that opportunity. But yeah, we want to minister to people who have been searching for a shepherd, and are without one, because we know what it was like to be without. And so we have a group of men. We have multiple shepherds. Let's share that while we can, and while there's need. And so it's really neat. And you realize how small this world is as you start to get out and you interact with these other believers. It's just, it ministers to me probably more than it does to those small churches, but it's just a great opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking you're speaking of opportunity here, and nobody can minister to another rural pastor better than an elder from a rural church who understands that ministry context, and to see yourself as moving beyond just your local ministry into that other context, I think is brilliant. And I know one of the keys that the Lord is using right now in your ministry. If we were to just if we were to be interested, if we're sitting here and it's like, I'm interested to find out more about what's going on at Sutton, what are some of the needs that maybe are unique to rural contexts, some of the needs that you guys are currently facing right now?
So rural ministry everywhere is hard because there's not jobs. Like, I'm going to be real with you guys. We're blessed to be provided for by being able to work here. And this is a part of my ministry and I love it. And then the church is able to give us a little bit,
but essentially you're bivocational.
Yeah, you have to be in a lot of these contexts. Like, these small churches can't afford, when there's 5, 10, 15 people in the church, they can't afford to pay you a salary. And so it makes it really difficult for young people to go into these ministries unless you have other skills. And so that's one thing I would encourage you. Definitely finish your training here, but while you're doing it, seek out some other skills where if you have that heart and that call, construction, electrical, whatever,
things making.
Yeah. so that you can go out and minister to these people, because they're desperate for it, and it's everywhere. The Midwest is another perfect example. So many churches empty, without a shepherd. So, as far as Sutton goes, we as a church need help. Every church does. We just need more people to come alongside us, whether it's they're coming into the church or they're saying, hey, we can send some people up this way. We can send people up that way. 'Cause that's not our thing. It's not, we don't own it. So let's all work together, and minister to these small and rural churches all across the state together.
If I'm a young person and I came to Sutton Bible Church on a Sunday, would I be embraced or would I be an outsider looking in?
Sutton as a church, as a body, is very loving. I think that's one unique thing that they have, that there's just something there. The people love people and they want to love on you. And if you're willing to be open to that, they'll love on you. It's going to be weird for a lot of you guys. I grew up on hymns, but it's not necessarily where I meet the Lord in worship. But that's where the majority of our congregation meets the Lord in worship. And so we're trying to find that balance. So there's challenges, and it's not, I'm not there because of the worship. I'm there because of the people, and I'm there because the Lord has us, a role for us,
I think that's so important. Love takes precedence, but you bring up the idea, this has to be kind of a calling. Mm-hmm. And it's not for everybody. And if is there a personality that lends itself to this, or is this something where the Lord just taps you and you go? Is there a necessary preparation time? Maybe as you reflect on your own story, what might move somebody in this direction? And do you see this as being a tremendous need today, especially in the state of Alaska?
If you're willing, he'll take you there. The Lord will take you there, and he'll make a way for it to work. Allie and I, when we moved up here, we're living in a tent for 3 months, living in a tent from September to 3 months from that point. And it was because of that church that we were given a warm place to stay. People opened up their spare cabin and said, hey, that was the Lord's provision right there, and love. And so if you have the heart and the desire and you feel that calling, take that step out to go, because the Lord will provide it. It's not going to be easy. Nothing is. it doesn't matter where you go. It's not going to be easy, but there's a desperate need for it. I mean, from the villages up north, that Pastor Tom can talk about, all across the state, there are churches who are desperate for and need leadership and shepherds and servants, and you guys are the next generation of that. And you guys are the ones that are going to be used to transform this state for Christ.
Amen. Well, thank you, Justin. You guys appreciate hearing that. Yeah. My final encouragement, having sat in your seat before, but having to live the Christian life. We actually have to live the Christian life too, guys, outside of the walls of this room, is guard your heart from idols. The idea that we're all supposed to end up on staff at a large church is idolatry. Guard your heart from idols and prepare your heart for battle. But it all starts in the heart. And one of the things that we need to remind ourselves of as we're studying here is that the Lord is about shaping our hearts. So if you have more questions about this, if this is an interest to you, now you know where to go. Why don't we go ahead and stand together, and we will close with a word of prayer. Lord, we're so thankful for Justin, for Ali, for his children and their ministry in a rural context. We're thankful for what you're doing in that church.